we are always asked, are you all organic? Are you biodynamic? All this kind of things. And my answer is no. And what we consider ourselves is responsible agriculture. And what I mean by that is when we're making agronomic decisions, we look at the health of the environment and our consumer first and foremost.
Mm.
But we're a triple bottom line philosophy company, which means that it has to be economically sustainable as well. And so there's a realism that needs to come into these decision makings, because it's really easy to kind of go off tangentially on the romanticism of what farming used to be. And I will admit I'm really kind of gearing this more towards people outside of our industry, because there does seem to be this motivation to for consumers to want to know where their food comes from and have the most healthy thing. But there is this notion that new is bad and old is good. And, it's interesting because I always kind of say, well, I mean, we don't think that way about our cell phones, do we? So why
True.
do we put that restraint on the farmers, So we promote basically good agricultural practices. And I make it a very good point to not demonize or villainize the direction that we have found ourselves in, because not to soapbox too hard, but quite frankly, nobody sat there and made particular decisions at a point in time. It's something that happened. Our modern food system is a result of micro checks and micro changes based mostly on consumerism, if you think about it. So it's interesting. Sorry, I can go off on that tangent pretty hard. So
No, that's perfect. I mean, honestly, that was my next question. Like, would you guys be considered organic or conventional? But I
mm,
mean, you're figuring out what works best for you guys and your environment and your land and your animals, and
yeah,
seeing what works, what doesn't, what has worked for hundreds of years, what technology can you infuse. And I think that's a really cool thing. Like, I'm not a farmer. I know a little bit about farming and ag, doing this for a couple of years, but like at some point, we consumers have got to trust the farmers. Like
yeah,
whatever we read up on Google is only going to be so good because we haven't, we don't work on a farm. We don't know the decisions you guys are making for the environment, for your animals, and of course for the bottom line. And so obviously you're going to make good decisions and do really good research because it's your job, it's your land. There's so much riding on your shoulders to make a good decision, obviously.
yeah. Because if you think about it, shortcuts are short-sighted, and short-sightedness tends to equal, just in its definition, a lack of longevity. And
Mm.
so, a rancher, a farmer whose sole income is based on the health of their land and their animals and their crops is, not going to be making short-sighted decisions, or shouldn't be. To your point, it's always good to question, but there is a point where we have an interesting dynamic here. And what it is I've heard this over and over again. Pre contact, which is prior to Western contact,
Mm.
Hawaii was completely sustainable and we had a huge population. 100% agree. It was an incredible feat. If you look at ancient aquaculture and agriculture practices, Hawaiians were top notch. But what I always like to point out to people is that at that time, 65% of the population was involved in food production.
Mm. Yeah.
So we are now at a point where we're at 2% or less. And, I always love that bumper sticker. If you've eaten today, thank a farmer, and I think so. It's kind of one of those things where we do have to recognize that, the farmers are required to produce food for everyone else. And so limiting their toolbox based on a hypothetical what if, or something that you're not necessarily even very schooled on, is something I caution people from doing, because play the whole movie kind of thing.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
That's pretty good. I did not know that 65% of Hawaiians back then were involved in agriculture, and that's why it was so
Something
sustainable or
around there.
around that.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. But yeah, I mean, with 2%, I mean that 2% can only do so much to feed the what 7 billion mouths we have three
Right.
times a day, and the problem is we're not doing that really well because food waste and all that good stuff. So
Yeah.
you don't need to limit that toolbox. And the toolbox reference, I've heard that a lot this year from different farmers and
Mhm.
ranchers. Like the toolbox is there. We've got to use what we've got to use, and it's there because like it's driven by consumers and their wants and needs, but also how we're going to reach those expectations.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. The toolbox is really, it's a very ubiquitous term with how we do what we do. And I think that there's a lot of external influence with intent to limit certain tools in our toolbox. And honestly, some of them, yeah. I mean, you look at some of those pesticides from the 50s and 60s. we've come a long way technologically in even in pest control. And there, yeah, I can see why, hey, maybe that chlorpyrifos or something, maybe that's not necessary because we've got these more modern, friendlier versions that are a little more, work directly on the insect that you're looking for. It's not just this broad spectrum type of thing. So I don't want to totally say, farmers should be totally left alone, but I think that my real call out is when people feel like they see something that they want to jump on a train, is to
Oh yeah.
really look at the two sides and do their due diligence in when researching, to not remain in an echo box and
Mm.
really kind of try to see what, what I mean, like really educate yourselves before, because what we're finding, at least locally, is that legislators are listening to general public concern, and without a lot of, um, you know, proofing themselves, and we're finding ourselves in some interesting predicaments because of that. So
Oh, 100%. And kind of going off of, like don't limit yourself to what's out there. Is there anything that you've used that maybe you were skeptical about it and then it changed your mind, or maybe you were a fan of it and then you were completely against it? Like in your farming background, has there been any moment that's kind of changed your perspective on what you initially thought?
totally. So I have a very poignant example. So we do a deep litter system piggery, which is basically our entire piggery sits on a giant 6 foot deep pit, and in that
Hmm.
pit, it's logs about 8 inches in diameter, and then branches, and then wood chips, and those wood chips are inoculated with what's called an indigenous microorganism, which is basically microbial growth that you'll see, when you have a mulch pond in your backyard and you flip it and you see that white webbing.
Yeah.
Very similar to that. It's
Okay.
basically the microbial growth that works on breaking down organic matter in whatever environment you live in. We spray our pens with what's called lactic acid bacteria, which is basically whey from milk when you separate curds and whey.
Okay.
And then we also spray it with something called FPJ, which is fermented plant juice. So I originally worked on the plantations in the pineapple, and so I'm coming from a very commercial background. So um, I go to this seminar and I hear about these piggeries. They're no smell, because what it does is that the entire mulching floor acts as a giant mushroom and gets rid of pig waste and food waste aerobically. So there's no smell. It breaks down
Oh,
like
okay.
a forest floor. And when I first heard about this, I was just like, "This is snake oil. You got to be kidding me! Like this, come on, right? This kind of thing." It works absolutely incredibly. It's one of those things that if you had just told me about it and I'd never seen it, I still probably wouldn't believe it. But I think that was a huge shift for me, and that plays into the biggest shift that when I went to high school and college, soil was meant to be a substrate that you fed with fertilizer and did things to hold your plants up. And I think what's been a huge shift in my world and just the world of ag in general is the importance of soil health, the importance of the
Mm.
microbial growth, the importance of the millions of little critters that live in dirt, and how that actually has a huge impact on plant health, how many inputs you got to use, what kind of pest control you got to use. I mean, it's those two are massive in my mind. And so, well, the one thing that was something I didn't think I'd like was the piggery, and the one thing that shifted was, we have to stop looking at farming being solely what man does in nature. It's a balance between nature and man, if that makes sense.
Mm. Yeah, those are really good. I heard a quote one day. I had this ag class in college, and we went to the University of Florida. They had their at like a plant breeding farm,
Mm,
and we were driving some tractors as like a class exercise. And the guy that worked there, he's like, farming's not that hard. The plants know what to do. We're just helping them get there. And
hmm.
I always think about that, like, you know what, like we're not telling corn what to do. Corn knows how to do it. We're just giving it the right things to grow. We're doing that for all
Yep.
produce, or even like cows, for example. Like the cows know what to do. We just have to help the cows grow. Like it's you got to work in harmony with nature and what's already happening.
I heard a really cool supplement to that, which is, have you the concept of yield potential? Have you heard that
Yeah.
before?
Hmm.
So, like every crop has a yield potential if left in a perfect environment. And the way that nature works is there is kind of a finite source of energy. It's an energy budget that Mother Nature works with. And, she needs to kind of distribute it equally throughout. And that includes pests, that includes things that you as a farmer may not like. And so all a farmer is really doing is crafting a situation so that that plant can hit its highest yield potential possible. It
Mm-hmm.
gets the most sunlight it can get, it gets the most food it can get, water it can get. And so that I always thought was really neat, because then it kind of takes the human out of, like, okay, you're the guy, you're doing it all. It's like, no, you are a steward, basically attending to a natural process. And manipulating isn't even the right word. You're creating an environment so that that crop has its best yield potential. So looking at it that way, I think, is a cool shift in mentality as well.
Hey everybody, welcome to our DC studio here with Farm Traveler. If you like this video, consider liking. If you want to comment on it, of course commenting, that helps us out a ton. And if you want to see more content on Farm Traveler, how you can connect with farmers, more farm tours, stuff like that, and of course clips from our podcast, hit subscribe. We just crossed over 1,000 subscribers, so thank you all so much. We have new content every week, and of course our little shorts here, which are like reels but on YouTube. So thanks for watching. Check out more videos. We'll see you in the next one.